and I thank members for their attention.
Thank you, Commissioner. That concludes that debate. 6 resolutions have been submitted, and the vote will take place after the next debate, which is on the situation and the cultural heritage of Kashgar. That's in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in China. The first speaker will be Mr. Kelam for 1 minute.
Commissioner, Uyghurs have practically become a minority in their historic homeland. They need international support to preserve their culture and identity. In fact, the fate of the ancient city of Kashgar has been put on stake. The modernisation programme targets up to 85% of traditional old Kashgar to be demolished. It is important to prevent the historic fortress to be replaced by modern apartment blocks. If the Chinese authorities are serious to convince us that all will be okay, they have first of all to convince the native population of East Turkestan that their cultural heritage will be really respected and that the Uyghur language will be taught in schools at equal level with Chinese language. I call on Chinese authorities to accept possible contributions by ICOMOS, which has impressive experience on the management of urban historic landscape, and I ask the Chinese government to agree to linking Kashgar to UNESCO World Heritage status that will include several cultural sites along the ancient Silk Road. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Skaka for 1 minute.
Commissioner, dear colleagues, under the title of Reform and Development, the ancient Silk Road city of Kashgar is being demolished. It is not only a blow to global cultural heritage, but most of all, this property is very important for the Uyghur and the Hui populations and for China's cultural diversity as a whole, which is now being destroyed. China has stepped up efforts to boost relations through cultural diplomacy throughout the world. But no one will be interested in a marketed, homogenised culture of a country which has such cultural diversity. Also, for economic opportunity and sustainable relations with the rest of the world, respect for human rights and minorities in the broadest sense is essential. We urge the Chinese government to assess the possibility of including Kashgar in the joint application with Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan for the Silk Road's UNESCO World Heritage designation. And the High Representative should step up the human rights dialogue with China and make it more action oriented and effective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, Ms. Scheringer de Udenberg for 1 minute.
Thank you. Our debate today on the minorities in China happened a day after the recent decision of Dalai Lama, when he no longer is going to be the Tibetan leader. I think we need to observe the situation in Tibet in the coming weeks and months. But today we speak about another discriminated minority, the Uyghurs, a Muslim minority. China often says that it fights terrorism and, unfortunately, in this case, at the same time destroys the historical heritage. We are especially worried about the changes in the city of Kashgar that destroys the old town, one of the most interesting and best preserved examples of architecture, Muslim architecture in Central Asia. More than 1 million tourists come every year to the city, and the city perhaps should be on the World Heritage UNESCO list if only China wanted it to happen. Hopefully the European Union is going to act efficiently, speaking to Chinese authorities, reminding of the need to respect minorities and protect cultural heritage. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Braypools, 1 minute. Thank you. It's clear that Kashgar is the symbol par excellence of the Uyghur cultural identity in East Turkestan, which is in China. On January 27th, I organised a conference in Brussels, and there I was able to see the impact that this Chinese destructive urbanisation is having on the Uyghur people. They're pretending, their excuse is public security, but no more than 15% of the original city is going to be left, and the rest, and it's just going to be turned into an open-air museum. I think it's a very high time that we reacted, and powerfully, before it's too late. This Parliament criticised the Chinese government for violently putting a stop to demonstrations in Urumqi a couple of years ago, and we called upon them to enter into a respectful dialogue with the Uyghur and a more integrated and comprehensive economic policy in the area to promote the local people and to protect their cultural identity. But sadly, today's Chinese policy today in Kashgar is the exact opposite. They are destroying Kashgar without giving the local people any say at all in what they're doing, and also their unwillingness to let Kashgar apply for UNESCO World Heritage status is typical of the way the Chinese Communist Party deals with cultural diversity. Thank you. You had a minute and a half. I'm sorry, it was my mistake. Mr. Tan.
The EU's motto is unity in diversity. Sadly, such a sentiment does not resonate in the People's Republic of China, whose communist rulers are obsessed with unity, but not much thought is given to celebrating diversity. Undoubtedly, the attempt to impose Han Chinese majority culture on tiny minorities in the world's most populous country is causing much tension and resentment. We already know about the suppression of the ancient Buddhist Tibetan culture over the last 60 years. Now we see the same threat looming over the city of Kashgar in the restive province of Xinjiang. For 2,000 years, Kashgar has been a thriving city on the Silk Road with a rich, unique Central Asian and flourishing culture, but now it's facing wholesale demolition and rebuilding. It's hard to escape the idea that this is Beijing's attempt to break the will of the Uyghur separatists. Now, I personally have no brief or sympathy for the separatist cause, some of whom I am afraid have links to Al Qaeda, but I urge the Chinese government to think again. The destruction of an ancient city like Kashgar would simply strengthen the resolve of all of those who would wish to foment violence against the state.
Thank you, Mr. Tannock. Next, Mr. Tavares, 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, dear President, dear colleagues. To tell you the truth, of the 3 urgent debates that we're holding this afternoon, this is the one where we feel most powerless. We've been talked about Pakistan, we talked about Belarus, and then we have reason to believe that the European Union doesn't just have moral authority, but it also has some leverage. It can try to bring pressure to bear so that the authorities in those countries will change matters. When we talk about China, we know that this leverage is much less. Despite what we believe, it's much lower because of what Sarkozy does in his capital, what Mrs. Merkel does in his capital, what my Prime Minister, Mr. Socrates, does. Recently, he actually sort of rerouted a demonstration against the Chinese regime because there was a visit from the Chinese president to Lisbon. So Chinese administration try to make us believe in this illusion that there's no demonstrations, there's no protest, there's no opposition in their country, whether you're in Canton or in Shanghai or in Tibet or in Uyghur. It's peace everywhere. So it's very difficult for the Parliament to say what we're going to say today, what we've written in our motion for resolution, and then to believe that this demographic genocide against the Uyghur would be brought to an end by our motion for resolution, and that we want the Chinese authorities to preserve these sites and these artefacts which have a huge cultural value, but our leaders, our heads of government, are throwing themselves into the arms of the Chinese administration because of the trade opportunities there, and at the end of the day we demonstrate here we demonstrate our impotence here because our governments end up seeming to show just admiration for the Chinese administration. But I think we've got to change our attitudes to the Chinese government in our own member state governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, speakers on behalf of the political groups, and the first is Mr. Posselt for 1 minute. Thank you, President. The Uyghurs, as has already been said, are not a minority. They're a very ancient people living along the Silk Road with their own leadership. They've had a Uyghur World Congress and they are hoping to preserve the cultural heritage of Kashgar, thanks through, among other things, an organisation which held a meeting recently in Strasbourg. So we need to send out a friendly appeal to the Chinese. This is a cultural ethnocide or genocide that they're engaged in at the moment. What they should do is to recognise that this is one of the characteristics of a genuinely cultured people is that they protect the cultures of minorities in their midst. So the Chinese need to only use their own constitution, which in 3 of its articles states that cultural heritage must be preserved. It's quite clear. What we want from our Chinese partners is to see them come up some way to meet our concerns and to protect the Uyghur and their heritage. Thank you very much. Next, for 1 minute, Ms. Kretsu.
Thank you very much, President. Personally, I feel that we have to look at things from different points of view. We must make sure that we don't take partisan views. We shouldn't just think of the Uyghurs or the Chinese. I think that what is happening in Xinjiang does show that there is violence, and we have to promote interethnic dialogue. The European Parliament's resolution shouldn't talk about the rights of the Chinese authorities to defend the security of their country, especially since there is the threat of there's the Islamic threat in the area. I think that we have to support democracy.
Thank you. Ms. Oyuland for 1 minute.
It's well known that Uiguria is in imminent danger of becoming a second Tibet. The People's Republic of China has announced the Kashgar dangerous house reform, the purpose of which is to raze 85% of the old city in Kashgar. Such Philistinism must be stopped, and the European Union must insist that the authorities of the People's Republic of China will not destroy this important cultural site and the ancient Silk Road. The United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Persons belonging to the national or ethnic, religious and linguistic minorities, as well as the Constitution of the Republic of China, must be respected even by Beijing. The Public Republic of China is more and more exercising sinicization of the ethnic minorities, such as Uyghurs and the Tibetans. It's a cultural genocide in the 21st century, which we simply cannot accept. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Pashka, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you for the floor, Chairman, Commissioner. The official circles in China have been unhappy when other ancient and important cultures were even mentioned, especially the civilizations that left the historical and cultural landmarks at the territory of contemporary China. The city of Kashgar is the center of Muslim Uyghurs. They represent one of the biggest national minorities of China. The Chinese have been trying to dominate the territory of Uyghurs for millennia, but they were defeated many times. That's why the Chinese administration tries to suppress the slightest manifestations of cultural traditions or even the identity intertwined with the city of Kashgar and its rich cultural heritage. I'm not sure if the official Chinese representatives are able to adopt a philosophy accepting traditions and history After all, the contemporary state of China is based not only in its own traditions, in the old traditions of history, but also in the tradition and history of other nations. The Chinese approach to Tibet, to the Uyghur cultural heritage in Kashgar, demonstrates that the Chinese administration cannot respect the assets brought into their own country by other nations and cultures. We have to send a clear message from this House that we, unlike the Chinese, do respect all the historical monuments at the territory of the Republic of China, including those in Tibet or ancient Kashgar. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kashgar. Bear with me. I used my gavel too soon. Now we have the other speakers on the list. First of all, Mr. Kelly, 1 minute.
Kashgar is a city of 3.5 million people, a little bit less than the population of the entire island of Ireland. It's closer to Baghdad than it is to Beijing. It's on the great trading route of the Silk Road and has some of the best preserved sites of Islamic architecture, some of them buried beneath the desert. Also has the largest mosque tomb in China and, of course, is a treasure without any doubt about it. However, it has been said it is under great threat, ostensibly because the Chinese want to redevelop the city because of its susceptibility to earthquakes, and that is not, of course, acceptable to us because we feel that a great treasure would be lost. What can we do about it? Perhaps very little, but at least highlighting it here today is important. We can, as we said, ask people to include it in the World Heritage Site for the Silk Road, and maybe also make people aware of the treasure that is there so that people there can preserve it into the future. It would be the world's loss, but a bigger loss to China. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. And now Mr. Repo for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. This resolution refers to this very important cultural tradition and heritage and the cultural identity of the Uyghur people. This is one of the great Islamic cities of Central Asia that we are talking about. It has a history stretching back to the time of the Han Dynasty in China, and it was a part of the Silk Road which united and joined Europe and Asia. So it has enormous cultural relevance to the entire world. We need to start actions that will help to preserve this city for future generations. There's also the question of the Uyghur cultural identity. Its destruction is part of a strategy by China, and we need to earmark funds to be used to help to preserve this cultural identity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Repo. And now we have the Catch the Eye procedure. Mrs. McAvoy has the floor for 1 minute.
Thank you. Future generations depend on our actions today to protect timeless sites such as Kashgar. Kashgar is fundamentally a pillar to the history of Islam in China. In 2009, the Chinese government announced an urban reconstruction programme that plans to demolish 85% of the old city of Kashgar to replace it with modern apartments. The demolition should be stopped. Urban planners should identify a development plan that preserves the old city of Kashgar. The whole Silk Road in China should be submitted for protection under UNESCO's World Heritage Programme, which China joined in 1985. I call upon the Commission and the Council to raise these matters with the Chinese authorities.
Thank you, Mrs. McAvoy. And now Mr. Romeva Irueda for 1 minute.
Thank you. Cultural heritage is crucial to preserve identity. This is clear in Europe, in China and wherever. And Chinese authorities know this. However, we have seen, for instance, how they have destroyed voluntarily this heritage, which means this identity, in several places like Tibet, and now they are doing the same in the Uyghur places like Kashgar. This is why it is so important that we once again explain our position, and we strongly ask the Chinese government to immediately stop the cultural destruction threatening Kashgar architectural survival, and to effectuate a comprehensive expert inquiry into culture sensitive methods of renovation. This is not for nothing. Credibility of a government is also based on how they treat their minorities. If China wants to be credible in the international sphere, it is important that they treat properly, adequately and according to human and respect standards the minorities such as Uyghurs. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Rubig. 1 minute. Thank you, President. Commissioner Hahn. I believe that culture allows one to assert one's identity on the international stage. And Karl Hasberg explained to us this week how important it is for the assertion of identity that these cultures be preserved, not just for the Uyghurs, but that their culture is available for the rest of the world as well. I think China ought to make some concessions here towards us. There's an agreement recently with Hangzhou that direct dollar investments will be possible in Zhengzhou, and so I see an opportunity that this region could be focused on more as well. And in the various cities and regions in China, we can ensure that all these cities and regions enjoy the same rights. And I think international relations with these cities and regions could help an awful lot. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rubig.